More than 70 years have passed since I Love Lucy first appeared on American television screens, and the people who built that show lived lives that were wilder, sadder, stranger, and more magnificent than anything Lucy Ricardo ever got herself into. One of them walked out of a Cuban revolution with nothing but his name and turned that name into a television empire worth millions. Another arrived on set as a 64-year-old man the entire industry had quietly written off, and became one of the most beloved characters in the history of the medium. A third was fired from the show by a co-star who feared she was becoming too attractive on screen, and went on to win the first Emmy Award ever given for Outstanding Supporting Actress. A child prodigy who had been earning $500 a week at the age of 3 sat down at a drum kit during an audition, and the most powerful couple in American television looked at each other and said, "That's him." And behind every frame of every episode, a woman who had been told by her own drama teachers that she had no talent was quietly reinventing what television itself could be. This is where those people went. Number 1. William Frawley as Fred Mertz. He was the one nobody wanted. Not the network, not the executives, not anyone with a professional opinion about the matter. And yet, Fred Mertz, cantankerous, miserly, vaudevillian, magnificently alive in every frame, became one of the defining characters in the history of American television. The man behind him was William Frawley, and his story is one of the most improbable second acts the entertainment industry has ever produced. William Clement Frawley was born on February 26, 1887, in Burlington, Iowa, the second of 4 children born to Irish immigrant parents. His father's family had crossed from Ireland to Iowa before the Civil War, and young William grew up in a household where hard work and Catholic faith were simply the fabric of daily life. As a boy, he sang in the choir at St. Paul's Catholic Church and performed at the Burlington Opera House, where the pleasure of holding an audience's attention took root and never let go. His mother, a devout woman, was deeply opposed to a career on the stage. To appease her, Frawley spent 2 years as a stenographer for the Union Pacific Railroad in Omaha, and later worked as a court reporter in Chicago. Then he gave it up. Show business won. He performed in vaudeville first with his brother Paul, then joined a pianist in an act called A Man, a Piano, and a Nut that took them out to San Francisco. In 1914, he married a performer named Edna Louise Brote, and the two built a light comedy act called Frawley and Louise, touring the Orpheum and Keith vaudeville circuits for over a decade. Their divorce in 1927 ended both the marriage and the act. Frawley moved to Broadway and then, in 1932, made the leap to Hollywood. Over the next 2 decades, he appeared in more than 100 films, bit parts, supporting roles, character turns across practically every studio in the business. He played Miracle on 34th Street's quietly pivotal political fixer. He appeared opposite Mickey Rooney in Huckleberry Finn. He possessed, by many accounts, a genuinely beautiful singing voice in his prime, and was reputedly the first performer ever to introduce My Melancholy Baby to vaudeville audiences. In 1912, a story he confirmed himself on a television game show panel just months before his death. He was 64 years old when I Love Lucy premiered on October 15, 1951. 64 with a documented drinking problem, a reputation for losing his temper on set, and a resume that was beginning to run dry. CBS executives warned Desi Arnaz against him. Arnaz, himself no stranger to a bottle, sat Frawley down and delivered the terms plainly. 1 infraction would cost him his paycheck, a second would earn a formal warning, a third would end his career with the show entirely. Frawley agreed, and then, for 9 straight years, he never once arrived late, never once appeared impaired, and mastered an entire week's script in a single read-through. He was, by the accounts of nearly everyone around him, the consummate professional. He inserted a clause into his contract, requiring time off during the World Series if his beloved New York Yankees were playing, a request that came into effect 7 times during the run, twice forcing the writers to work around his absence entirely. He was nominated for the Outstanding Supporting Actor, Emmy, 5 consecutive years, from 1953 through 1957. He never won. He never quite forgave it either. His relationship with co-star Vivian Vance was, depending on who you asked, a genuine feud or a mutual professional intolerance held at barely civil distance. He reportedly overheard Vance complaining that he was old enough to be her father rather than her husband, and never forgave her for it. "She's one of the finest girls to come out of Kansas," he once said, with precise deadpan delivery. "But I often wish she'd go back there." Vance, for her part, refused a lucrative spin-off series with him after the show ended rather than spend any more time in his company. He took it personally. He took most things personally. When I Love Lucy wrapped in 1960, Frawley was not finished. He signed on to play Bubbo Casey, the gruff live-in grandfather on My Three Sons, a role he held for 5 seasons before failing. Health finally forced him out. His body, worn down by decades of the life he had chosen, could no longer pass the insurance requirements for the production. On March 3, 1966, 5 days after his 79th birthday, William Frawley collapsed of a heart attack while walking along Hollywood Boulevard after seeing a movie. He was taken to a hospital and was pronounced dead shortly after. Desi Arnaz, one of the few genuine friends Frawley had ever made, took out a full-page ad in all the Hollywood trade papers that simply read, "Buenas noches, amigo." He served as a pallbearer at the funeral. Lucille Ball said, "I've lost one of my dearest friends, and show business has lost one of the greatest character actors of all time." Fred Mertz, as it turned out, had not been a role. He had simply been William Frawley wearing a landlord's cardigan. Number 2, Dallas McKennon, cameo connection, and the voice behind the shadows. Before we continue with the principal cast of I Love Lucy, it is worth pausing briefly for a remarkable figure who existed just at the edges of this world, and whose own career ran parallel to the show's cultural moment in ways that seem almost too improbable to believe. Dallas McKennon appeared in a small guest role on I Love Lucy during its run, one of the hundreds of working character actors who cycled through the show's stages during those 6 seasons. But McKennon himself was, in another corner of American entertainment, one of the most widely heard and least recognized figures of the entire era. Born on July 19, 1919, in La Grande, Oregon, he was raised by an aunt and uncle after the early death of his mother. He served with the Army Signal Corps in Alaska during the Second World War. When he came home, he found his calling in front of a microphone. McKennon voiced Gumby for Art Clokey. He was Archie Andrews in the long-running Filmation animated series. He voiced Buzz Buzzard in the Woody Woodpecker cartoons. He provided voices for some of the most beloved Disney animated features ever made: Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, Mary Poppins, Bedknobs, and Broomsticks. He was historically the first actor ever to voice Scrooge McDuck in 1960. At Disneyland itself, his voice was built into the experience. He recorded the safety announcement for the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad ride, and his laughter was woven into the Africa Room section of It's a Small World. At Epcot, he voiced Benjamin Franklin in The American Adventure. He married Betty Warner in 1942, and that marriage lasted 67 years, producing 8 children. On July 14, 2009, 5 days before what would have been his 90th birthday, Dallas McKennon passed away in Raymond, Washington. His ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean at his own request, a final gesture from a man whose life had been entirely about sound, story, and the quiet joy of making children believe. Number 3, Keith Thibodeau as Little Ricky. He was 5 years old when he sat down at a drum kit on a Hollywood soundstage, and the most powerful couple in American television looked at each other and decided the search was over. Keith Thibodeau, billed on the show under the stage name Richard Keith because producer Desi Arnaz felt his Cajun French surname was too difficult for American audiences to pronounce, was born on December 1st, 1950, in Lafayette, Louisiana, and had been a professional musician for 2 years before anyone on the I Love Lucy production team had ever heard of him. He was 5 years old when he joined the cast in 1956. He is 75 years old today in 2026, and he holds a distinction that no one else in the world can claim. He is the last surviving regular cast member of I Love Lucy. His father had recognized something in his son almost from infancy. Keith began playing the drums at 2 years old. By the time he was 3, he was touring with the Horace Heidt Orchestra, earning $500 a week, a sum that, adjusted for inflation, amounts to roughly $6,000 a week in today's money. He was not a novelty act. He was genuinely, uncommonly gifted, and the audiences who came to see the Height Orchestra understood the difference. The audition for I Love Lucy was pure accident and pure legend simultaneously. His father brought him to the Desi soundstage. Lucille Ball looked at the small boy who had just walked in and asked, perfectly reasonably, what he actually did. His father said he played drums. Ball appeared unconvinced. Arnaz, who happened to be present, gestured toward a drum kit sitting nearby and told the boy to go ahead. Keith sat down and played. Arnaz walked over and began playing along with him, improvising, watching him, testing him. Then he stood up and said the words that defined the next 4 years of this child's life. Well, I think we found little Ricky. The role required him not only to resemble Desi Arnaz closely enough that audiences would believe he was their son, which he did with striking accuracy, but also to perform actual drum passages on camera, which he did with a musicianship that was entirely his own. What followed was simultaneously an extraordinary childhood and a deeply strange one. He was welcomed into the Arnaz family with a warmth that blurred the boundaries between professional engagement and genuine family membership. Lucy Arnaz recalled in later interviews that for years she had assumed, as a small child, that Keith was actually a relative, that he had always simply been there, traveling with them, present in every photograph, teaching Desi Jr. to play drums on the weekends. It was only gradually that the lines clarified. The problem was that the lines were already blurred in the public mind in a way that would follow him for decades, because little Ricky had been born on January 19th, 1953, the same day Desi Arnaz Jr. came into the world in real life. Many viewers had come to believe, without ever quite examining the belief, that Keith Thibodeau was Lucy and Desi's actual son. He spent years gently correcting the misunderstanding. When the show ended and the Arnaz marriage collapsed in 1960, the world Keith had known came apart with it. Desilu Studios had no regular work for him. His father had a falling out with Lucille Ball and was let go from the studio. The family moved back to Louisiana. The adjustment was brutal. He was a famous child in a world that had moved on, with no clear path forward and a trust fund that would not fully pay out until he turned 21. A sum that amounted in the end to $8,000, half of which he spent on a sports car. The 60s carried him into rock music, and he joined a band called David and the Giants that toured through the South. By the early 1970s, drug use had hollowed out what the early years had built. He has spoken and written about those years honestly. The darkness, the suicidal despair, the sense of having been handed an identity at the age of 5 and then left to figure out who he actually was once the cameras stopped rolling. The conversion to Christianity in 1974 was not a convenient ending. It was the thing that pulled him back from the edge. He reconnected with the band, which reinvented itself as a Christian rock group that recorded throughout the 1980s and 1990s. He married Kathy Denton, a professional ballet dancer, and became the executive director of her touring Christian ballet company, Ballet Magnificat, in 1993. He wrote his autobiography, Life After Lucy, in 1994, which remains one of the most honest accounts any former child actor has ever given of the experience. His daughter Tara grew up to become a dancer and choreographer, married former NBA player Bryce Drew, and built a life of her own. Keith Thibodeau, 75 years old in 2026, continues to perform, to speak publicly about his faith, and to represent, with evident grace and without apparent bitterness, a show that shaped him before he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. Number 4. Vivian Vance as Ethel Mertz. She was the one Lucille Ball didn't want. Not because Ball was wrong about the role, she was precisely wrong about the role, but because she had envisioned Ethel Mertz as significantly older, significantly heavier, and significantly less magnetic than the woman who actually showed up. What Ball had wanted was someone who would make Lucy Ricardo look like the undisputed star of every scene. What she got was Vivian Vance, who made Lucy Ricardo look better precisely by being brilliant herself. It took Ball several months on set to understand the distinction. Once she did, the two women became inseparable. Vivian Vance was born Vivian Roberta Jones on July 26, 1909, in Cherryvale, Kansas, the second of 6 children raised by parents whose religious strictness pressed down on her ambitions like a stone. Her mother's response to the teenage Vivian's announcement that she wanted to be an actress was unambiguous. You want to be an actress, trying to lead men into sin? You are going to hell. Vivian went to hell anyway, or at least to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was close enough. She changed her last name to Vance, after the folklorist Vance Randolph, a teacher who had made an impression on her, and became a founding member of the Albuquerque Little Theater, where she appeared in productions for no salary, simply to learn and perform. She was so good that the local theater community took up a collection to send her to New York to study under the respected director Eva Le Gallienne. Broadway came next, and she was genuinely, recognizably excellent on it. She understudied Ethel Merman in Anything Goes, and Merman took her under her wing with the protectiveness of someone who recognized a real talent and wanted it nearby. She went on to her own starring roles, most significantly the Cole Porter musical Let's Face It, where she appeared alongside Danny Kaye for 547 performances. She was, by the late 1940s, a legitimate Broadway star. Then came the breakdown, a severe psychological collapse brought on, those who knew her believed, by the accumulated weight of years of emotional suppression, compounded by a marriage to actor Philip Ober that was allegedly physically abusive. She spent time in a sanatorium and emerged from it changed, quieter, and with a harder-won understanding of her own limits. She was 42 years old when I Love Lucy premiered on October 15, 1951. She had been spotted by director Mark Daniels in a production of The Voice of the Turtle, and Daniels had brought Desi Arnaz to see her, insisting she was exactly right. Arnaz was convinced on sight. Ball was not. The show had already determined that Ethel Mertz needed to wear unflattering, off-the-rack clothing purchased from department stores to prevent her from overshadowing Lucy. A persistent legend later circulated that Vance was contractually required to remain at least 25 pounds heavier than her co-star. In fact, no such contract ever existed. It was a gag document that Ball had presented to Vance at a party, which was mistaken for a legal instrument and entered television mythology as fact. What was real was the deliberate dowdiness of the wardrobe, the frumpy hairstyles, the calculated effort to make the landlady look like the landlady rather than a former Broadway leading lady. Vance tolerated all of it for years, with the quiet professionalism of someone who understood what she had and was not going to throw it away over clothing. In February 1954, she became the first recipient of the Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actress in television history. She was nominated 3 more times for the same role before the show concluded. The feud with William Frawley, who played her husband Fred, was genuine and sustained, rooted in a comment he overheard her making about the implausibility of the age gap between them. He was 22 years her senior, and she had said so loudly to whoever would listen. He heard about it and never softened toward her afterward. When the show ended and CBS offered them a lucrative spin-off series as The Mertzes, Vance declined, refusing to work one-on-one with Frawley on any terms. Upon learning of his death in 1966, she is reported to have said, "Champagne for everyone." Whether she meant it as celebration or dark release has never been entirely clear. She reunited with Lucille Ball for The Lucy Show beginning in 1962, on the condition that her character be named Vivian rather than Ethel. She had grown tired of being addressed as Ethel by strangers everywhere she went. As she told a colleague, "When I die, there will be people who send flowers to Ethel Mertz. No one even knows who Vivian Vance was." The commute from her home in Connecticut to the Hollywood lot proved punishing, and she reduced her appearances and eventually withdrew from the series. In 1973, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. A stroke in 1977 left her partially paralyzed. Her last appearance with Lucille Ball was in the CBS special Lucy Calls the President, which aired that November. Vivian Vance died on August 17, 1979, in Belvedere, California, at the age of 70. She never had children. She left her Emmy to the Albuquerque Little Theater that had first believed in her and sent her to New York with a collection of other people's money. She was posthumously inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 2012, alongside William Frawley. There was, it must be said, a certain justice in that final pairing. Number 5, Desi Arnaz as Ricky Ricardo. He was the one the network didn't want. CBS executives looked at the prospect of pairing an all-American redhead with a Cuban band leader and saw a problem where there was, in fact, a revolution waiting to happen. The accent was wrong, they said. The audience wouldn't accept it, they said. Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball responded by taking their act out on the road for an entire summer, performing live for audiences across the country, and proving that the network was mistaken in every direction it looked. The show went on the air. The rest is American history. Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Acha III was born on March 2, 1917, in Santiago de Cuba, to a family whose place in Cuban society was as far from poverty as it was possible to be. His father was the youngest mayor of Santiago and served in the Cuban House of Representatives. His maternal grandfather was a founding executive at the Bacardi Rum Company. The family owned a cattle ranch, 2 dairy farms, and a villa on a private island in Santiago Bay. Arnaz was enrolled in an elite private school and was being prepared for a career in law and politics. Then, on August 12, 1933, the first Batista Revolution swept Cuba. His father was arrested. The family's properties were seized. 16-year-old Desi and his mother fled to Miami with nothing. In Miami, he cleaned bird cages. He worked in a rail yard. He drove taxis. He spoke almost no English. He attended St. Patrick's High School during the day and worked to help pay for a room in a boarding house at night. Then he discovered music. He joined Xavier Cugat's orchestra playing conga drums and singing, learned from watching Cugat operate at the highest level of Latin entertainment, and eventually broke away to form his own band. In 1937, back in Miami, he introduced the conga line to American audiences at a hotel ballroom, an utterly novel concept that ignited a national craze. The conga line spread from Miami to New York, from New York to Hollywood. Arnaz followed it. He was cast in the Broadway musical Too Many Girls in 1939, and it was on the film version of that production, made in 1940, that he met Lucille Ball. They married the same year. A union that would survive a touring schedule, genuine mutual attraction, serial infidelity on his part, Ball's several miscarriages, and the pressure of building a television empire from a borrowed $5,000. He was 34 years old when I Love Lucy premiered on October 15, 1951. What the audience saw was Ricardo, the exasperated Spanish-cursing, bongo-playing bandleader whose wife's manic schemes unwound in spectacularly watchable ways. What the audience did not see was that Arnaz was running the entire production from behind the camera simultaneously. He was the one who insisted the show be filmed on 35mm rather than the standard kinescope recording, understanding from the beginning that the physical preservation of the footage was the key to its lasting value. He was the one who negotiated the deal that gave Desilu Productions full ownership of the show's library, a deal that earned them a reported $4.5 million when they sold the rights to CBS in 1956, and which made him and Lucille Ball the first television stars to become millionaires through their work. He was the one who invented the syndicated rerun, essentially creating the economic model by which the entire television industry would operate for the next half-century. He also built Desilu into the studio that would eventually produce Star Trek, Mission, Impossible, and The Untouchables. He did this while performing in front of a live audience every week, while managing a band, while carrying a marriage under enormous strain, and while suffering from chronic health problems that included diverticulitis, knee injuries that had disqualified him from overseas military service during the Second World War, and later a near-fatal accident in Baja California, in which the floor of his home collapsed and he was impaled by a tree stump. An emergency surgery saved him. The marriage ended in divorce in 1960, on the day after filming the final episode of the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, on what was also the day after his 43rd birthday. Ball filed papers in Santa Monica. He sold his share of Desilu to her in 1963, married a woman named Edith Mack Hirsch later that year, on what would have been his and Ball's anniversary, and retreated to Del Mar, California, where he owned a horse breeding farm and raced thoroughbreds. A horse race at the Del Mar track is named in his honor to this day. He emerged occasionally, a guest appearance here, a production credit there. His final screen appearance was in the 1982 film The Escape Artist, directed by Caleb Deschanel, and produced under Francis Ford Coppola's Zoetrope Studios. In 1986, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Lucille Ball visited him in the hospital, and they watched episodes of I Love Lucy together on videotape. On November 30th, 1986, what would have been their 46th wedding anniversary, she called him. They could barely speak by then. She said, I love you, Desi, I love you, over and over. He answered, I love you too, honey. Good luck with your show. She was the last person to speak with him. He died 2 days later, on December 2nd, 1986, at the age of 69. 5 days afterward, Lucille Ball received the Kennedy Center honor. A statement Arnaz had written before his death was read aloud at the ceremony by actor Robert Stack. It ended, P.S. I love. Lucy was never just a title. There is, in the whole history of American television, no sentence more precisely true than that one. Number 6, Lucille Ball as Lucy Ricardo. And now, her. The woman whose face has, by some calculations, been seen by more people worldwide than that of any other human being who has ever lived. The woman who was told at the age of 15 by the teachers at her own drama school that she lacked talent, that her mother was wasting money sending her there, that she should consider another line of work. The woman who built a television empire on the foundation of that insult, and who redefined what was possible for a woman in American entertainment so thoroughly and so permanently that the redefinition is no longer visible as a redefinition. It simply looks like the way things are. Lucille Desiree Ball was born on August 6, 1911, in Jamestown, New York, the daughter of a telephone lineman who died of typhoid fever before she was 4 years old. Her mother eventually remarried, and Lucille was raised partly by her grandparents in Celeron, a small town near Jamestown. Her grandfather took her to vaudeville shows and community theater productions, and somewhere in those darkened halls, the thing that would define her entire life ignited and would not go out. She enrolled at the John Murray Anderson School for Dramatic Arts in New York at the age of 15. Among her classmates was a young Bette Davis. The school's owner wrote to her mother to say that Lucille was wasting her time and everyone else's. Davis, by contrast, was considered a genuine talent. This assessment turned out to be among the more spectacularly incorrect critical judgments in the history of the performing arts. She went back to Jamestown briefly, then returned to New York under the stage name Diane Belmont. She worked as a hat model, as a waitress, as a coat check attendant at Hattie Carnegie's salon. She appeared in the chorus of shows that never materialized into proper runs. She was hired in 1933 as the Chesterfield Cigarette Girl, which brought her enough attention to begin landing small film roles in Hollywood. The studio system called her Beehive Brunette, and later Queen of the Bees. She made film after film, always as a supporting player, always orbiting the stars, but never becoming one. She was 17 years old when she was struck by rheumatoid arthritis so severe it temporarily immobilized her, a condition she spent years fighting back to full mobility. At 30, on the set of Too Many Girls, she met Desi Arnaz and married him the same year. She was 40 years old when I Love Lucy premiered on October 15, 1951. 40 years old, with a film career that had never quite caught fire, and a radio comedy, My Favorite Husband, that CBS was eager to translate to television, but only if she agreed to work opposite a partner they considered commercially acceptable. She refused. The partner would be Desi Arnaz, her actual husband, or there would be no show. The network called the casting unconvincing. She and Arnaz went on the road for an entire summer to prove them wrong. The physical comedy she brought to Lucy Ricardo has never been surpassed in the medium. The Chocolate Factory, the Vitameatavegamin commercial, the grape-stomping sequence in Italy, the Harpo Marx mirror scene. These did not happen spontaneously. Ball was a ruthless perfectionist who spent hours in rehearsal working out the precise mechanics of each routine, the exact angle of the face, the precise timing of the stumble, the specific duration of the held beat before the reaction. The improvisation was an illusion created by enormous technical preparation. She called her cinematographer, the Oscar-winning Carl Freund, Papa, and together with Arnaz, they developed the 3-camera filming technique in front of a live studio audience that became and remains the standard format for every television sitcom ever produced since. The decision to film on 35mm was hers. The insistence on retaining ownership of the library was hers. The vision of what the show could become was shared equally between her and Arnaz, and it is a genuine injustice that his contribution to that vision went largely unrecognized for most of American television history. The show was #1 in the ratings for 4 of its 6 seasons. In 1953, the episode in which Lucy Ricardo gave birth to little Ricky was watched by 44 million Americans, a number that represented approximately 72% of all households with a television set at the time. The birth had been scheduled on the same day as Ball's own cesarean section, a convergence so precisely engineered it is almost impossible to believe it wasn't scripted. CBS had refused to allow the word pregnant to be spoken on the air. The episode's official title was Lucy is enceinte. The show never dropped below 3rd place in the Nielsen ratings during its entire run. It was the first television series ever to conclude its run while still sitting at the absolute top of the ratings. It was not canceled. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz chose to stop. After the divorce in 1960, she did not stop. She produced the Broadway musical Wildcat that same year. She married comedian Gary Morton in 1961, and that marriage held, warmly and with evident mutual affection, for the rest of her life. In 1962, she became the first woman to run a major television studio when she purchased Arnaz's share of Desi and became its president, the first woman to hold that position at any Hollywood studio since Mary Pickford in the 1920s. Under her leadership, Desi produced Mission, Impossible, and Star Trek. When she sold the company to Gulf Western in 1967, the transaction was worth $17 million. She continued performing The Lucy Show, Here's Lucy, a 1985 television film called Stone Pillow, in which she played a homeless woman in Manhattan in a dramatic role that surprised everyone who saw it. Her final television series, Life with Lucy, was canceled after 8 episodes in 1986, a failure that wounded her more than she admitted publicly. Her last public appearance was at the Academy Awards on March 29, 1989, 8 days before she was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with chest pains. A dissecting aortic aneurysm near her heart was diagnosed. Surgery lasted 7 hours and appeared successful. On April 26, 1989, 8 days after the operation, she awoke in the early morning with severe back pain and lost consciousness moments later. She died at 5:47 in the morning at the age of 77. The date was Carol Burnett's birthday. Ball had sent Burnett flowers on her birthday every year for decades. Burnett received them one final time that morning. She was cremated. Her ashes were initially interred at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Hollywood Hills. In 2002, in accordance with a wish she had expressed, her remains were moved to the Hunt family plot at Lakeview Cemetery in Jamestown, New York, near the place where she was born. The drama teachers who told her she had no talent are not buried there. The girl who had no talent is. And the world that was changed by that girl's refusal to believe them continues every day to rerun the evidence. There it is, an entire world that existed just behind the cameras and the laugh tracks of I Love Lucy, tragedies and triumphs, quiet exits and extraordinary reinventions. A Cuban boy who fled revolution and built an empire, a Kansas girl whose mother said she was going to hell, and who ended up giving the world its most beloved friendship instead. A man of 64 whom everyone had given up on, who became immortal, a child prodigy who lost himself and found his way back. And at the center of it, always, a woman from Jamestown, New York, who was told she had no talent, and who responded by becoming the most recognized face in the history of human civilization. The show never ended because it failed. It ended because the people who made it chose to stop. The people who made it went on, to heartbreak, to reinvention, to legacy, to grief, and in the end, to a kind of permanence that neither Hollywood nor history can quite explain. They simply made something so alive that it refused to stay in the past, and it never has. Tell us in the comments, which of these stories surprised you most, and where in the world are you watching from today? If you want to keep finding the real stories behind the classic shows and the people who created them, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.